With everything we're seeing over in Bart's v. Anthropic with that class action settlement, it's not surprising at all that a lot of authors are going to go their own way. They've dropped out, and they said they were going to put in their own lawsuit. Well, a lot of them have done it here in Cruz v. Anthropic. And the interesting feature of this one is it's not a class action. So are we learning that there are problems with class action copyright cases? Maybe we are. You get why they don't want to be part of the settlement, but on the other hand, they seem to be looking for a do-over, because there are a lot of things in Bart's v. Anthropic that did not go well for them. That major ruling on fair use, how AI training is quintessentially transformative, spectacularly so, etc. They're acting like none of that happened before, and they get to just do it over, and I think they're trying to take advantage of the fact that Judge Alsup retired. But Judge Martinez Olguin has taken over the case, and she's been fully briefed on it and brought up to speed on it. We don't have a judge yet in this case, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if Anthropic moved to relate the cases and have them all under Judge Martinez Olguin. But regardless, it's just a lot of the stuff that failed and failed and failed and failed and failed before. And a lot of this is going to go straight back into the very reasons that Anthropic made that interlocutory appeal in the first place. Because Judge Alsup ruled in a completely different way than Judge Chabria over in Cadre v. Meta. They both ruled it was all fair use up to a point. Cadre said, well, actually downloading the files for BitTorrent may not be. Whereas Judge Alsup said, no, that part's fine. It's the fact that they kept the files after they were done with them. So Anthropic made an interlocutory appeal, and just before it was going to be argued up at the Ninth Circuit, boom, they came in with the settlement, settled for pennies on the dollar. And these authors are very salty about that. But here we have it right here, just in page 2 of the complaint. Torrenting works by breaking a file into many small pieces and distributing those pieces across a network of participating computers. A user downloads portions of a file from numerous other computers that already possess the file, and software reassembles those pieces into a completed whole on the user's machine. But torrenting protocols not only facilitate downloading, they also facilitate and encourage uploading. And through Anthropic's torrenting of copyrighted material from illicit shadow libraries, Anthropic became a distributor of unauthorized copies of protected works. That was what was said in Cadre, not Bart's. So all this means we're probably going to go right back up to the Ninth Circuit with another interlocutory appeal, which is what I had said before. It's just delaying the inevitable. That settlement was just the lawyers and the publishers just trying to get what they can right now before the circuit courts start ruling against them. But we're not just talking about that. We're talking about a lot of things that were over and done with a long time ago. For example, Anthropic purchased and scanned millions of physical books, reproducing their contents without authorization. Judge Alsup said, hands down, that is fair use. Because if you purchase a book, you get to digitize it for your own purposes. That is long settled. That was over and done with a long time ago. And in fact, in this case, when they scanned the physical books, they destroyed the books. So Judge Alsup said that it was even less infringing here, since ordinarily you'd end up with 2 copies and they destroyed one of the copies, so there's one fewer copy than there actually would have been otherwise. Oh, and we have this absolute loser argument. Anthropic also stripped these materials of copyright management information. How many times? Enabling, facilitating, and concealing the infringement of these works. Adding insult to all of this, injury. There's been no injury, it's just fair use. Anthropic's use of plaintiffs' copyrighted materials facilitated Anthropic's creation of AI models capable of generating content that directly competes with and will compete directly with plaintiffs' content. But copyright isn't there to protect you from competition. And that again is another place where they're just going against decades and decades of precedent here. Just because you've made a competing work doesn't mean it's not fair use. That has nothing to do with it. There is no competition factor in fair use, although they're trying to worm one in. Here's the part I thought was interesting. Plaintiffs desire to retain full control of their case and avoid having their rights diluted by being swept into sprawling class action settlements structured to resolve claims for pennies on the dollar. It's actually less than a penny on the dollar when you look at it. Recent history has shown that certain class actions and proposed settlements seem to serve the tech conglomerate infringers, not creators and publishers. Actually, as we've covered, it looks like the publishers are going to make out pretty good. It's just the authors who are getting shafted. Very interesting that they've mentioned the publisher here when none of them are publishers. These are all authors. LLM companies should not be able to so easily extinguish thousands upon thousands of high-value claims at bargain basement rates, eliding what should be the true cost of their massive willful infringement. Hey, it was the plaintiffs who came up with a settlement. Anthropic was ready to take it up to the Ninth Circuit, which is the point. They knew that in all likelihood, Anthropic was going to prevail up to the Ninth Circuit. So, I mean, it's good that they're realizing the class action lawsuits are really only a benefit for the big publishing houses and the law firms, and maybe even helping to demonstrate that there should be no such thing as a class action copyright lawsuit. Alright, skipping a lot of the stuff, because it's the same thing we've seen many times, and just focusing on their actual charges. Because their first one is Anthropic's business and bypassing of the licensing market. You know, the one Judge Alsup said the Copyright Act does not entitle them to exploit. Ironically, they keep citing Bart's v. Anthropic, so I don't know. I don't know how they think that's going to help them. And of course, Anthropic stripping of copyright management information. And the unauthorized scanning. Anthropic has purchased physical books at scale, often in batches of tens and thousands, and scanned them into digital files for AI training. Yeah, but they purchased the books. These are ones they didn't download from the internet, or get from BitTorrent or from a pirate library or anything. They physically purchased the books, and then they scanned them in. They get to do that. And they just admitted that. Purchased physical books at scale. So they bought them. So what are you complaining about? So from all those infringements, Anthropic created a general research library or generalized data area. That is, Anthropic created a permanent central library of pirated published materials, including the plaintiff's works, to exploit for a range of unspecified other purposes such as research. So if you remember, that was Judge Alsup's one exception. That, hey, if you kept this, you can do other things with it, things that aren't fair use, even though he had already ruled that AI training is fair use. But Anthropic's response was, well, we're an AI company. What else are you expecting us to do with them? We just do AI. The only other thing we could conceivably do with them is more AI training, which you just ruled is fair use. So how does that make sense? That was a big question going up to the Ninth Circuit. And we have the very argument that the Supreme Court has called circular before. There is an existing market for licensing copyrighted materials such as plaintiffs, including for use in the development of LLMs. Anthropic bypassed that market, and in doing so, deprived plaintiffs of licensing revenue they would have earned. But as Judge Alsup said, in the very ruling you guys keep citing, even if such a market exists, it's not one the Copyright Act entitles you to exploit. And it makes no sense if you're doing a fair use and you say, oh, you harm the market, and you say, okay, well, what market? It makes no sense for you to say the market for the material so someone can acquire them for a fair use purpose. That's circular. Supreme Court said that's not allowed. And they also say Claude, trained on the plaintiff's works and the protected works of others, is capable of generating outputs that compete directly with and serving as replacements for the plaintiff's works. And this is a trend throughout this filing. They're confusing the training data with the outputs. Those are two entirely different things. If someone uses Claude to produce an infringing output, that's on that user. That's not on Anthropic. And again, it would have to be a market replacement, not merely competing directly. And then again, they say, pose a serious risk of diluting markets for works of the same kind as in their training data. Market dilution again. Copyright protects your expression, not your market. Photography was once said to dilute the market for portrait painters. I remember in the 80s, when synthesizers came out, I heard all sorts of other musicians saying, oh, they're going to dilute the market for musicians. They didn't say that exact word, but that was what they were saying. Because I was second horn in an orchestra at the time, and that's what a lot of the other musicians in the orchestra thought. How can you work with synthesizers? They'll take our jobs away. Online publishing, same thing, you're diluting the market for print. Oh, how many printers have lost their market to blogs? You don't have to print it anymore, just post it online. So count 1 is direct copyright infringement. The defendant, without authorization for plaintiffs, copied, downloaded, reproduced, ingested, parsed, embedded, folded, spindled, mutilated, injected, inspected, detected, infected, neglected, and selected pirated copies of the plaintiff's works in the development, training, fine-tuning, and deployment of its commercial LLMs. These acts violated plaintiff's exclusive rights under 17 U.S.C. Section 106. Alsup found all of that to be fair use. And whoever is judging this case should too. If not, expect an appeal. That's where we're going with all this. We're just going right back up to the Ninth Circuit. The very thing the settlement exists to avoid. Count 2, contributory copyright infringement. This is where Cox comes in. Well, again, we've got that confusion between training data and outputs. They're kind of glomming all of those together. But the training data, what they're talking about there, isn't contributory infringement. They're just alleging infringement with that. The contributory part is where the outputs are being used by people to make competing works. Under Cox, they would have to show not that Anthropic knew that this was inevitably going to happen or had knowledge that it was happening. They either have to actively induce the infringement or have a service that has no substantial non-infringing use. And they can't say either one. So I'm expecting that one to go pretty quickly too. Count 3 is the CMI crap. And that's it, so now they're demanding a jury trial. Yeah, they're trying to get a do-over on the whole case. We want a mulligan. We want the fair use judgment to not be a thing anymore. We want to pretend like it didn't exist and roll the dice with a different judge. See, my guess is that they're only trying this because Judge Alsup retired, and they're thinking that whoever the new judge is just someone they're going to be able to take advantage of. You know, it's kind of like, you know, when you were in school, and you had like the class jocks and the rich bitches that, you know, thought they could manipulate everyone. The day they have a substitute teacher come in, they think they can misbehave in class, or they think they can lie to the substitute teacher. Yeah, she just lets us watch movies all day. Just because there's a substitute teacher. But Martina Zolguin isn't a sub, and she's been thoroughly breached on Alsup's findings. But even apart from that, or even if they get a different judge, I'm sure Anthropic is going to be all over this. Referring to that very same ruling by Judge Alsup, and using the term judicial notice more than Neil deGrasse Tyson uses the word stardust. So it'll be interesting. I've got this one in my follow list. It'll be interesting to see what Anthropic does in response, what motions Anthropic makes if they make an interlocutory appeal. This is entertaining. I don't think they're going to get their do-over. I think most of this is going to go away fast. But we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you so very much for watching. Comments for the Comment God, shares for the Share Throne. Please hit like, subscribe to the bell, and once again, donate.bogosity.tv if you want to keep me doing this. Yes, I do plan on doing other videos when things kind of stabilize now that I'm back from vacation. I've got one Lord Killian video in particular I want to get working on. So there will be other things coming if you're kind of burned out on all these AI videos, which to tell you the truth, I kind of am too. But there's just been so much to talk about and it's so important. So donate.bogosity.tv, one-time donations or regular monthly support. Thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, stay strong and be free.